Picture this. It's March 2006, and cameras are rolling for what everyone thinks is just another regular episode of Soul Train. The dancers are ready, the music is pumping, and the crew is setting up for what should have been a routine taping session. But something goes terribly wrong that day. Something so shocking, so controversial, that it would end one of the most beloved television shows in American history forever. The episode that was filmed that day has never been seen by the public, and according to people who were there, it never will be. What happened behind those studio doors was so dramatic that it didn't just cancel a TV show. It destroyed the dreams of the man who created it and left millions of fans around the world wondering what could have possibly been so bad that it killed Soul Train for good. For over 30 years, Soul Train was more than just a television show. It was a cultural phenomenon that changed the way America saw music, fashion, and dance. Every Saturday afternoon, families would gather around their TV sets to watch the coolest dancers, the hottest music, and the most incredible fashion that the world had ever seen. The show made superstars out of regular people and gave a voice to a community that had been ignored by mainstream television for far too long. But on that fateful day in March 2006, something went so wrong during the taping that the show's creator, Don Cornelius, reportedly walked out of his own studio and never came back. Within weeks, Soul Train vanished from television screens everywhere without any explanation, without any goodbye, and without any warning. The mysterious final episode became known as the forbidden footage that supposedly revealed secrets so damaging that they had to be buried forever. Let me take you back to the beginning of this incredible story, to a time when a young man from Chicago had a dream that would change television history. Don Cornelius was born in 1936 on the south side of Chicago, in an America that was deeply divided by racial segregation. Growing up in a world where black people were often excluded from mainstream entertainment, Cornelius dreamed of creating something that would showcase the incredible talent and culture of his community. Before he became a television legend, Don Cornelius worked regular jobs just like everyone else. He was a traffic officer directing cars through busy Chicago streets, and he worked as a salesman trying to make ends meet. But deep inside, he knew he was meant for something bigger. In 1966, he decided to take a chance on himself and enrolled in a short broadcasting course that would change his life forever. Soon after finishing the course, he landed a job as a reporter at WCIU-TV, a small local Chicago television station. It was there, working at that little TV station, that Don Cornelius came up with an idea that would revolutionize American television. He wanted to create a music show that was made by black people, for black people, featuring the music and dance that he grew up with. He called his vision Soul Train, and on August 17, 1970, the very first episode aired in Chicago. The show was simple but powerful. It featured local dancers showing off their moves while live musicians performed the hottest songs of the day. The response was immediate and incredible. People had never seen anything like Soul Train on television before. Here was a show that celebrated black culture without trying to water it down or make it more acceptable to white audiences. The dancers wore the latest fashions, they moved to the rhythm of soul and funk music, and they looked like the people watching at home. It was authentic, it was exciting, and it was exactly what America needed. Just over a year later, on October 2, 1971, Soul Train went national. Major companies like Sears and Johnson Products Company agreed to sponsor the show, and suddenly Don Cornelius found himself with a platform that reached millions of viewers across the entire country. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. America was going through massive social changes, and Soul Train became a symbol of black pride and cultural expression during one of the most important decades in civil rights history. During its golden years, Soul Train became the place where music legends were made. James Brown, the godfather of soul, brought his incredible energy to the Soul Train stage. Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, performed her powerful songs that moved audiences to tears. Marvin Gaye shared his smooth voice and socially conscious lyrics with the world. The Jackson 5, featuring a young Michael Jackson, danced and sang their way into America's hearts. Later, as music evolved, artists like LL Cool J and Mary J. Blige continued the tradition of incredible performances. But Soul Train wasn't just about the famous musicians. The show created stars out of regular people who could dance. Rosie Perez, who would later become a famous actress, got her start as a Soul Train dancer. Jody Watley danced on the show before becoming a successful recording artist. Clinton Gent and Jeffrey Daniel became household names, with Jeffrey later teaching Michael Jackson the moonwalk that would become one of the most famous dance moves in history. The most iconic part of every Soul Train episode was something called the Soul Train line. Picture two rows of dancers facing each other, creating a pathway down the middle. One by one, dancers would step into that center aisle and show off their best moves while everyone else cheered them on. It was pure magic. Regular people got their 15 seconds of fame, and viewers at home got to see incredible creativity and self-expression. The Soul Train line became a cultural symbol that represented freedom, joy, and the power of music to bring people together. For viewers, watching Soul Train became a weekly ritual. Every Saturday afternoon, families would plan their day around the show. It was more than just entertainment. It was a place where Black Americans could see themselves represented on national television in a positive, powerful way. They could see their fashion, their music, their dance moves, and their culture celebrated and respected. During a time when most television was dominated by white performers and white perspectives, Soul Train was revolutionary. Don Cornelius was much more than just the host of the show. He was the executive producer, the editor, and the creative genius behind every single aspect of Soul Train. His calm, smooth personality gave the show a sophisticated feel that was unlike anything else on television. When he spoke, people listened. His famous catchphrase, asking viewers to stay aboard for another ride on the Soul Train, became part of American pop culture. But more importantly, Cornelius had a vision that television should not belong to just one group of people. He believed that all cultures deserved to be represented truthfully and positively on the airwaves. Over 3 decades, Soul Train aired more than 1,100 episodes, making it the longest-running music television program in American history. At its peak in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the show was averaging weekly ratings between 4.5 and 5.0, which meant millions of people were tuning in every single week. Fashion and cosmetics companies that wanted to reach Black consumers saw Soul Train as the perfect place to advertise their products. The show became central to mainstream American culture, influencing everything from music trends to fashion styles to dance crazes. The success of Soul Train led to other ventures that expanded the brand far beyond television. The Soul Train Music Awards began in 1987, celebrating the best in soul, R&B, and hip-hop music. There were Soul Train fashion events, merchandise, and licensing deals that made Don Cornelius a wealthy man. In 1971, Life magazine recognized his incredible influence by naming him one of the 100 most important Americans. He had achieved something that seemed impossible. He had created a platform that celebrated Black culture while also appealing to mainstream America. But success often comes with challenges, and as Soul Train became more popular and influential, tensions began to build behind the scenes. Don Cornelius was known throughout the television industry as someone who demanded perfection and maintained strict control over every aspect of his show. He didn't just decide what music got played or which artists got invited to perform. He also controlled how the dancers looked, what they wore, and even how they moved. Rosie Perez, who danced on Soul Train for several seasons, later revealed that Cornelius did not allow dancers to perform moves that he considered too suggestive or inappropriate. If he didn't like the way someone was dancing, he would ask them to change their style or risk being removed from the show. This level of control extended to costumes, hairstyles, and even the attitudes of the performers. Cornelius had a very specific vision for what Soul Train should represent, and he was not willing to compromise on that vision. Many of the dancers who appeared on Soul Train later revealed something that shocked fans. Despite appearing on national television and helping to make the show a success, they were never paid a single penny for their performances. The opportunity to dance on Soul Train was considered so valuable, so life-changing, that compensation was never discussed. For many young people, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, appearing on the show was seen as a chance to be discovered and launch a career in entertainment. But some dancers later said they felt exploited, as if their creativity and energy had been used to make other people rich while they received nothing in return. As the 1980s came to an end and the 1990s began, a new style of music started to dominate American culture. Hip-hop was emerging from the streets of New York, Los Angeles, and other major cities, bringing with it a raw, honest, and sometimes controversial sound that was very different from the smooth soul and R&B that Soul Train had always featured. This created a major problem for Don Cornelius, who had very strong opinions about what kind of music should be showcased on his program. Cornelius believed that hip-hop portrayed too many negative aspects of Black culture. He was concerned about the language used in rap songs, the violent imagery in some of the lyrics, and the overall message that he felt the music was sending to young people. In a 1992 interview, he stated very clearly that he didn't want his show to be taken over by sounds that he didn't believe represented anything positive. This was a controversial stance that immediately divided the music community and Soul Train's audience. Many artists and music producers felt that Cornelius was out of touch with what was happening in black culture. They argued that hip-hop was the authentic voice of a new generation, and that Soul Train was falling behind the times by refusing to embrace it. New television shows like Yo! MTV Raps and Rap City on BET quickly filled the gap that Soul Train had left, featuring the hottest rap artists and giving them a platform to reach their audience. Leading hip-hop artists like Tupac Shakur, Nas, and Snoop Dogg rarely appeared on Soul Train, which meant that younger viewers started looking elsewhere for their music and entertainment. This disagreement about musical direction led to a clear and steady decline in Soul Train's popularity. While the show had averaged ratings above 4.0 throughout the early 1980s, by the early 2000s those numbers had fallen below 2.0. Local television stations began moving the show to less desirable time slots or replacing it entirely with programs that they felt were more current and appealing to modern audiences. In 1993, after 23 years as the face and voice of Soul Train, Don Cornelius made the difficult decision to step down as host. The role was passed on to younger hosts like Maestro Harrell, Shamar Moore, and Dorian Gregory. Each of these new hosts brought their own energy and personality to the show, but none of them could replicate the calm authority and symbolic presence that Cornelius had represented. For many longtime fans, Soul Train without Don Cornelius just wasn't the same show they had grown up watching and loving. The producers tried everything they could think of to bring Soul Train back to its former glory. They redesigned the stage to look more modern, they invited more hip-hop artists to perform, and they experimented with different formats and segments. But these changes felt like temporary fixes rather than real solutions. The show's foundation had been built on Don Cornelius's specific vision, and without that guiding force, Soul Train struggled to find its identity in a rapidly changing entertainment landscape. Between 2003 and 2006, the problems became even more serious. The number of episodes produced each season was cut back significantly, and the production team went through major changes as longtime staff members left for other projects. The show's internal structure was no longer stable. Experienced editors resigned, technical staff moved on to newer programs, and mounting production costs made investors question whether Soul Train was still a viable business venture. Don Cornelius, meanwhile, began to disappear from public view. The man who had once been a regular presence at industry events and award shows gradually stopped making public appearances. He stopped giving interviews and rarely made any public comments about the show he had created. What had once been a source of tremendous pride and accomplishment now seemed to cause him pain and disappointment. Soul Train continued to air weekly throughout this difficult period, but it was no longer the cultural force it had once been. Younger artists looked for other platforms to showcase their talent, new dancers didn't stay with the show for very long, and the program entered a state of creative stagnation that was obvious to anyone who watched regularly. The energy and excitement that had made Soul Train special seemed to be draining away, episode by episode. Then came March 2006, and the taping session that would change everything forever. According to people who were there that day, the atmosphere on the set was unstable from the very beginning. The production crew had been changed at the last minute, which created confusion and uncertainty about how things should be done. The guest list was disorganized, with some people unsure about who was supposed to perform and when. There were clear signs that the show's senior executives were not providing the kind of direction and leadership that the production needed. Several sources have claimed that Don Cornelius was backstage that day, even though he no longer had an active role in producing the show. Longtime staff members said that he was visibly upset about the current state of Soul Train and openly expressed his disappointment with how far the program had drifted from his original vision. The tension in the studio was reportedly so thick you could cut it with a knife. The episode was scheduled to feature a rising hip-hop artist, but problems began almost immediately. The taping started nearly an hour late due to disputes between the artist's representatives and the show's logistics team. There were disagreements about everything from the lighting to the camera angles to the way the performance should be presented. What should have been a routine taping was turning into a disaster. According to a former editorial staff member who was present that day, the performance that was eventually recorded crossed visual boundaries that Soul Train had traditionally maintained. The artist's performance included provocative visual elements, choreography, and costumes that were deemed completely incompatible with the show's family-friendly image and original vision. The content was so far removed from what Soul Train represented that it created an immediate crisis among the production team. The controversy escalated dramatically when Don Cornelius reportedly demanded that the entire taping be stopped and called for an emergency meeting with the show's distribution partners. He was said to be furious that his life's work was being used to promote content that went against everything he had tried to build over more than 3 decades. The meeting was heated and emotional, with Cornelius expressing his outrage at how his vision had been corrupted. One of Soul Train's major distributors, Tribune Entertainment, made a shocking decision shortly after that meeting. They withdrew their support from the show, which left Soul Train without sufficient network coverage to continue national television broadcasts. According to internal data, within just 3 weeks of that controversial taping, more than 40% of local television stations that had been airing Soul Train stopped showing the program entirely. No formal announcement was ever made about the show's cancellation. There was no farewell episode, no goodbye message to the fans, and no explanation of what had happened. Industry insiders understood that the March 2006 taping had effectively become the final episode, but the general public was left completely in the dark. The official Soul Train website stopped updating, television networks quietly replaced the show's time slot with other programs, and the production schedule was cancelled indefinitely. Several media reports began referencing the buried episode as the primary reason behind Soul Train's sudden end, but the footage from that day's taping was never officially released to the public. The controversial episode did more than just disrupt a single taping session. It marked the silent, mysterious end of one of the most iconic television programs in American history. The footage from that final taping remained in the possession of several former staff members, but it has never been made available to the public. Fan pages on social media have discussed the incident for years, referring to it as a cursed performance that destroyed the show's legacy. The mystery surrounding what actually happened that day has only grown over time, with various theories and rumors circulating but no official confirmation of the details. Right after Soul Train disappeared from television, the media attention focused on Don Cornelius himself. The man who had been synonymous with the Soul Train brand since day one refused all interview requests following the incident. In a brief appearance on a local radio station in 2007, he simply said, "I think it went far enough," before declining to elaborate further. From that point on, he almost completely withdrew from public life, leading many to believe that he felt deeply betrayed by what his creation had become. The public remained confused and hungry for answers, but a few former dancers and guest performers began sharing their personal reflections on what had happened. Rosie Perez called the show's sudden end an unnamed sadness that affected everyone who had been part of the Soul Train family. Dorian Gregory, who had been hosting the show during its final years, admitted that no one on the production team had received clear communication about why the show was ending. Many people only realized that Soul Train was over when the internal taping schedule simply disappeared from the system without any explanation. Independent media outlets began investigating the show's collapse, publishing analyses that tried to piece together what had really happened. A 2008 article in Vibe magazine stated that Soul Train wasn't cancelled because of low ratings. Instead, it was cancelled because the trust within the organization had completely fallen apart. The people who had built the show together could no longer work together, and the creative differences had become too great to overcome. The Soul Train Music Awards, which had been running annually since 1987, continued even after the television show ended, but they were completely separated from the original program's brand. Though the award show had been created by Don Cornelius, control was handed over to BET in 2009. The subsequent ceremonies adopted a much more modern tone and rarely referenced the golden years of the original Soul Train television show. This only deepened the sense of loss among longtime viewers, who felt as if an important cornerstone of American pop culture had been erased without any proper explanation or farewell. Meanwhile, digital platforms began to give Soul Train a new kind of life. Old VHS recordings and performance clips from the 1970s and 1980s were uploaded to YouTube, where they garnered millions of views from both nostalgic fans and curious newcomers. A completely new fan base emerged, mostly composed of younger audiences who hadn't grown up watching the show but were drawn to its incredible music, iconic fashion, and classic performance style. These new fans often expressed amazement at what they were seeing, unable to believe that such an incredible show had existed and then disappeared so mysteriously. Still, the final years of Soul Train, those turbulent episodes from the 2000s, remained largely unspoken and unavailable to the public. What stood out to many observers was the string of personal troubles that followed Don Cornelius after his show ended. In 2008, he was arrested on charges of domestic violence, though he was not sentenced to jail time. His personal life seemed to be falling apart just as dramatically as his professional legacy had crumbled. Then came the most tragic chapter of this story. On February 1, 2012, Don Cornelius died by suicide at his Los Angeles home, leaving behind numerous unanswered questions about his final years and the mysterious end of Soul Train. The Los Angeles Times, in a memorial piece, wrote that though he had been a trailblazer who changed American television forever, Cornelius had exited the main stage in the quietest way possible. His death sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry and left fans around the world mourning not just the loss of a television legend, but the realization that they would never get answers to the questions that had haunted them for years. After Don Cornelius passed away, television historians began re-evaluating the entire journey of Soul Train and its place in American culture. Some referred to it as a fragmented legacy, pointing out that the show's mysterious ending had overshadowed some of its incredible achievements. Others believed that Soul Train had fulfilled its historical role and that its quiet disappearance was simply the natural result of changing times and evolving entertainment preferences. But what remained undeniable was that the 2006 broadcast shutdown was still shrouded in unresolved mysteries that continued to fascinate people. Observers began calling it the Soul Train curse, a phrase that was more symbolic than literal but seemed to capture the uneasy feeling that surrounded the show's end. When people looked at what had happened to various people who had been part of Soul Train over the years, from dancers to staff members to Don Cornelius himself, there seemed to be a pattern of difficult endings and unresolved conflicts. The emotional toll of Soul Train's mysterious ending was something that many former staff members carried heavily for years. More than the financial losses or career disruptions, it was the sense that something beautiful and important had been destroyed in a way that didn't make sense. They had been part of creating something that brought joy to millions of people, and then suddenly it was gone without explanation or closure. Nearly 2 decades after Soul Train vanished from television, the show has not faded into historical obscurity. Instead of being forgotten, the program has become the subject of revival efforts across various forms of media. From documentaries and biographical dramas to museum exhibitions and academic studies, each new project affirms the same thing. The influence of Soul Train continues to pulse through popular culture, especially within the African American community. In 2019, BET announced its first full-length biographical series about Don Cornelius's life, called American Soul, starring Sinqua Walls as the television pioneer. The series portrayed the show's early days during a volatile period in American society, and while it took some dramatic liberties with the facts, it delved into tensions that the general public had never known about. The show explored the internal struggle to preserve black cultural identity within a television industry that was dominated by white executives and white perspectives. Though American Soul did not directly address the mysterious 2006 taping that ended the original series, it captured the intense pressure and creative conflicts that existed behind the glamorous facade. Beyond television and film, museums and cultural institutions began including Soul Train in their collections dedicated to preserving African American heritage. The Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture now holds various artifacts from the show, including original costumes that were once worn on air by dancers and performers. During scholarly panels and academic conferences, researchers have argued that Soul Train should be considered a cultural treasure worthy of preservation, much like Motown records or the social art movements of the 1960s and 1970s. YouTube became an unexpected hub for collective Soul Train memory, where thousands of performance videos, behind-the-scenes clips, and interview footage were reconstructed from personal archives and local television station collections. Audiences born after 2000, people who never experienced the show during its original run, became a new generation of Soul Train enthusiasts. They began mimicking the classic choreography, recreating the iconic fashions, and even hosting themed parties inspired by the famous Soul Train line dance segment. On social media platforms, hashtags like Soul Train Challenge went viral in 2021, with young artists like Lizzo, Anderson .Paak, and her participating by posting videos of themselves dancing in the show's classic style. Some groups organized costume competitions themed around 1970s fashion to honor the show's memory. What had once been considered outdated had suddenly become a source of endless inspiration for artists and general audiences alike. From a historical preservation standpoint, many media scholars are now calling for a complete restoration of the entire Soul Train series from 1971 to 2006. A significant number of episodes, especially from the early groundbreaking years, have been digitally remastered and made available on streaming platforms where new audiences can discover them. However, the final seasons from the 2000s remain largely untouched and unavailable to the public. Most significantly, That last episode, taped in March 2006, though it was never destroyed, has still never been released to the public. Many industry insiders believe it will never be officially published due to legal sensitivities and the controversial content that allegedly caused the show's demise. The forbidden footage has become something of a holy grail for Soul Train fans, who continue to speculate about what could have been so shocking that it ended a cultural institution overnight. The legacy that Don Cornelius left behind is no longer measured simply by the number of episodes that aired or the ratings that the show achieved. Instead, his impact is measured by how Soul Train defined an entire concept, that a music program could be more than just entertainment. It could be a cultural declaration, a statement of identity, and a platform for communities that had been marginalized by mainstream media. Soul Train was the first place where many Black Americans saw themselves represented on national television in their own clothes, performing their own dances, and celebrating their own music. It was a rare form of cultural power, especially during an era that was still marked by racial segregation and limited opportunities for authentic representation. The show proved that Black culture didn't need to be watered down or made more palatable for mainstream audiences. It could be celebrated exactly as it was, in all its creativity and authenticity. The abrupt silence that descended in 2006 could never erase those decades of groundbreaking television. On the contrary, the mysterious ending turned Soul Train into an interrupted icon, and it is that very incompleteness that continues to fuel the public's desire for answers and closure. What remains from those 35 years of broadcasting is more than just performance footage. It represents a shared cultural memory for multiple generations of viewers. Those who danced to Curtis Mayfield's music, who sat in front of their television sets every Saturday afternoon, and who believed that there was finally a place on screen where Black dreams and aspirations were allowed to exist and flourish. Though Soul Train ended nearly 20 years ago, the values and cultural significance it represented remain vivid in popular memory and continue to influence new generations of artists and entertainers. The unaired episode from March 2006 may forever remain in the shadows, locked away from public view. But the light that Don Cornelius ignited when he created Soul Train continues to spread and inspire people around the world. That light represents more than just the legacy of a television program. It stands as a powerful statement of cultural identity, authentic voice, and the importance of representation for communities that have historically been overlooked or marginalized. Sometimes, the stories that are never fully told become the ones that history remembers most powerfully. The mystery of Soul Train's ending has only added to its legend, ensuring that people will continue to talk about and celebrate the show for generations to come. And maybe that's exactly how it should be, because some cultural treasures are too important to be forgotten, even when their endings remain forever shrouded in mystery. If you've ever watched Soul Train or are just discovering its incredible legacy for the first time, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What moment from the show do you remember most clearly? What aspect of Soul Train's cultural impact moves you the most? Don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with anyone who appreciates the untold stories behind American television history. And make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you won't miss our future deep dives into the legends, mysteries, and cultural phenomena that shaped the entertainment world we know today.